Lapel pins let you proudly show off where you've been or where you stand, from an event you've attended or your political beliefs, to your professional affiliation or your favorite sports team. Lapel pins cost pennies to produce, but some are collector's items worth thousands of dollars. They may be tiny, but they're out there in huge numbers. This one company churns out about 5 million lapel pins a year. It all starts with the sketch of the pin design, and from that, the master, a negative made of magnesium, a type of metal. They'll make copies of this master to create a production mold. But first, using what's called a coping saw, they cut out the front and back pieces of the master. Using a dispenser about the size of a sewing needle, they glue the pieces together with epoxy. It takes 5 minutes to dry. Then they cast enough copies of the master to fill up a rubber disc. After tracing the outlines, a worker uses a surgical knife to meticulously carve out the cavities. He softens the rubber with paint thinner to enable precision cuts. Then he places a copy of the master in each cavity. Another disc goes on top. Then it's into a machine called a vulcanizer for 1 hour. This machine uses heat and pressure to cure the rubber, making it as hard as a car tire. It also melds the rubber around each master copy, embedding the detail. This will be the production mold for producing this pin design. Now, using a surgical knife again for precision, they carve out sprues, channels that during the casting process will direct the flow of molten metal to the cavities. They also make smaller curved channels called runners to filter out any air or dirt particles. It's crucial to position the sprues and runners correctly because this mold produces an entire line of a particular pin. Mess up and they'd have to remake the mold from scratch. Next, they insert a 1/2-inch long brass tack called a post into each cavity. It'll later fasten to a clasp, attaching the pin to clothing. The post goes in now rather than later so that it will fuse to the back of the lapel pin during casting. Now, to close the mold, they align the buttons on one half with the depressions in the other half. The mold then goes into what's called a spin casting machine. Using a cast iron ladle that can withstand the fiery temperature, they pour in molten metal, either pewter, zinc, or a tin alloy. As the machine spins, centrifugal force propels the metal into every nook and cranny of the cavities. After a minute of spinning, 400 rotations, the mold comes out. The metal takes about 5 minutes to cool and harden. The factory remelts the excess metal for the next batch. Next, a brass clasp called a clutch goes onto the post. Now the lapel pins go for an hour-long wash in soap and water and abrasive stones. The stones smooth out any rough edges. The pins go into the electroplating tank for a surface coating of metal. How many coats and the types of metal vary with the design. An electric current draws the metal particles onto the pins, plating them thoroughly. These pins first get copper plating, then nickel plating, then gold plating. Now it's time to paint the lapel pins. Workers follow a numerical guide like a paint-by-numbers kit. They paint each pin individually using minute quantities of epoxy paint. They control the paint syringe with a foot pedal. Once the paint dries, a machine called a pad printer gathers up the ink and stamps on the tiny details, the ones too small to paint by hand. Pierce the post through fabric, secure it with the clutch, and this lapel pin is now ready to wear.
Leather production dates back to primitive times, when humans rubbed fats into animal skins to preserve them. Times have changed, but leather endures. From footwear to furniture, this tough material remains an integral part of our lives. This leather comes from the hides of cows killed for meat. Without tanning, these cowhides would go to waste. Converting them to leather is a kind of recycling. The first step is to cut each hide in half. The hides are draped over a sawhorse, stamped with an identification code, and sliced down the center. 2 smaller pieces will be easier to handle and process than 1 large hide. Hundreds of these hide halves are loaded into a modified cement mixer for some serious hair removal. As the mixer fills with water, a worker dumps in a combination of sodium sulfhydrate and lime. A chemical reaction strips the hair from the hides. The hairless hides now get an acid bath to prepare them for the tanning process. The tanning itself happens inside big wooden drums with prongs to keep the skins from getting tangled. Chrome salts turn the hides a robin's egg blue as they bind to the collagen fibers of the skins. The hides have now been preserved into leather. Next, the pieces are fed, grain side up, into a machine that slices the leather to an even thickness. The cutoffs won't be wasted. They'll be recycled into suede. Workers check each piece of leather with a gauge to confirm that the thickness is uniform. Now, it's back into the wooden drums for a second tanning, this time using a solution of vegetable extract, tree bark, and water. Dye is added along with a chemical that will make the leather water resistant. The solution binds to the leather, giving it a brownish tone. It's a gentler process than the first tanning, and it softens the leather. Now, a mixture of starch and water is brushed onto the tanned hides. This paste-like solution allows the hides to be pressed onto big glass frames, which also have been moistened with the same starchy mixture. This process allows the leather to dry flat. Prevents it from shrinking, and stops the edges from curling up. After 4 hours in a dryer, it's time to remove the leather. It easily peels away from the glass. A revolving paint gun system dyes the leather. And now it's time for the finishing touches. A glazing jack pulls a glass cylinder over the leather, and the abrasive action polishes it. This glass is very strong, so it can do this vigorous work without shattering. Finally, huge heated rollers smooth out any wrinkles. It's the end of the production line for this big pile of leather, but just the beginning for so many other products. Fashionable and tough, it's no wonder this ancient material continues to be one of our favorite products today. Gels and filters can turn a bad scene into a beautiful one. They're used in theater productions to enhance the mood on stage. They're also used in film and photography to adjust color temperatures from different light sources. These lighting gels can make any scene take on a different mood. They're called gels because they used to be made of gelatin film, but today they are made out of transparent polyester. The process begins with a mix of solvent, dye, and flame retardant chemicals. This produces a colored lacquer. A worker tests the lacquer's thickness by pouring it into a brass cup with a hole in the bottom. As the lacquer drains out of the hole, it's timed. If it flows too quickly, the lacquer is too thin, and if it drains too slowly, it's too thick. A steady flow means the lacquer mix is the perfect consistency, about as thick as engine oil. A sample of every batch undergoes this test because the lacquer's consistency is critical. If the factory doesn't get it right, it won't bond to the clear polyester. With the lacquer prepared, workers load the polyester film into the coating machine. A big roller soaks up lacquer from a tray below and spreads it on the film. A thin bar on the roller evens the spread and scrapes off the excess. The lacquer dries in seconds. Every production run of the same color has to precisely match the last, so inspectors regularly test the lacquer's hue on swatches of clear polyester. If gel colors are even slightly mismatched, using them together will make for a patchy-looking job. Differently colored gels create different effects. This orangey red one will warm up daylight to look more like indoor lighting. Now, in a test, a gel swatch is held over a flame. The gel burns but never catches fire, proving that this batch is ready for the hot lights of a movie set. Over at another station, they're working on a different sort of color changer, a filter that goes on a camera lens. A special sheet of optical plastic is dipped in hot water and dye. The hot water opens the plastic's pores, allowing the dye to penetrate. When the plastic cools, the color will be trapped inside. The longer the plastic stays in the dye bath, the deeper the color. Some sheets only get partially dyed. They'll be turned into filters that affect only half an image's exposure. Filters made from a range of colors will help the camera's eye do what the human eye does effortlessly, adjust to different lighting conditions. The colored sheets are sheathed in thin plastic. This prevents scratching as they're cut to size. These camera filters are nearly done. All that's left is for the inkjet printer to brand them. A similar type of printer gives the lighting gels their trademark stamp. And now it's time to wrap things up. A cardboard core slides into a machine that winds the finished gel sheets onto it. Then, a pneumatic ram pushes the roll of lighting gel into a plastic bag. Now, these filters and gels are ready to show life in the best light possible.
There's nothing like the sound of a car engine starting, especially when it's 15 below on a winter morning. Today's automotive batteries are smaller, more powerful, and more efficient, even at extreme temperatures. It's all thanks to the power of lithium-ion cell technology. While dissecting a frog in 1786, the Italian researcher Galvani noted that when his scalpel touched a leg muscle, it contracted from an electric current produced. Later, Volta believed the current was produced by the metal instruments, the animal being only a conductor. To prove it, he stacked discs of zinc and copper, connected by conductors and fabric, impregnated with an acid solution. And so, in 1800, the electric battery was born. Batteries power all kinds of electric motors. A new lithium metal polymer battery pack such as this one could soon power an electric automobile, as well as a hybrid vehicle. This battery will be made up of 4 components. It all starts with this lithium ingot, which weighs about 11 pounds. It is transformed into a thin sheet by this extrusion press that applies 440 tons of pressure. The press creates a sheet that's only about 1/100th of an inch thick. The whole extrusion sequence is closely computer controlled. Extrusion is now completed. The metallic lithium sheet is the required 1/100th of an inch thick. The sheet has to be further thinned. Placed on a roller, it is carried to the laminator. At room temperature, it is thinned once again. In just 20 minutes, the 11-pound ingot will have been transformed into a thin sheet 0.01 inches wide and some 655 feet in length. This laminator completes the thinning of the sheet. The resulting 1¼ mile long sheet will allow for the fabrication of 210 battery units. Lithium is a soft, sticky metal. For this reason, a polypropylene film has to be fixed onto the lithium sheet. Without this protection, the sheet would adhere to itself and become unusable. The sheet will be used to make individual battery cells. Then these cells will be assembled in series and in parallel and inserted into modules of different shapes. To make an individual battery cell, the sheet has to be rolled up. This automated spooling machine winds up the lithium film in 26 revolutions. The wound-up sheet is put into a vacuum oven, where the various layers adhere firmly to one another. This step lasts for about 90 minutes at 176 degrees. Here, a test is made. Using a voltmeter, the battery is checked to see that it produces the required 3.56 volts. Any problem can be detected here and corrected. A final quality check is made with this caliper. It precisely measures the thickness of the battery cell. The battery cells are then stored. Metallic plates are placed between them for the entire storage period. One more step remains, and that's the metallizing of the contacts. The battery cells are sent off to a fabrication facility in this container. The container is robotically handled. First, it's put into a protective tank. Then, the metallizing of the contacts is done by spraying on molten metal. This takes just a few seconds since the metal cools very quickly. The battery is now finished. It is comprised of 4 elements: lithium, which acts as the anode, a metallic oxide cathode, a dry solid polymer electrolyte, and a metallic current collector. All that remains to be done is the assembling of the individual battery cells into a module. It begins with the placing of individual cells onto one another and isolating them with foam so that they do not touch each other. These red sheets are actually heating elements, since the lithium metal polymer cells function at temperatures of between 104 and 176 degrees. Here we see these modules of the battery pack for a hybrid vehicle, an automobile that works with a gasoline-powered motor and an electric motor. This prototype battery was created for a totally electric vehicle. It surpasses heavy traditional lead-acid batteries that can't develop the same amount of electrical energy and have much shorter lifespans. The odds of winning big in a lottery are slim, to say the least. Still, we keep hoping that lottery ticket will become our one-way ticket to extreme wealth. Experts say your odds of picking the winning numbers never change, no matter how many people buy tickets. Lotteries are by no means a modern invention. The emperors of ancient Rome held them for entertainment. European monarchs used state lotteries to help fund their extravagant lifestyles. And the American colonies held lotteries to finance roadwork and construction projects. Pressure from the church and widespread fraud led many countries to ban lotteries during the 1800s. But governments eventually reconsidered. They just couldn't resist milking that cash cow. Eye-catching lottery tickets are designed by graphic artists. A technician takes the design, separates it by color, then sends the information to a machine called an image setter, which generates one negative per color. Next, they place the appropriate colored film under each negative and expose it to ultraviolet light. This hardens the color not shielded by the dark portions of the negative. When they wash away the unhardened color, they're left with a color image. They layer the films to make the client a mock-up of the finished lottery ticket, in this case, a scratch and win type. Now they make the printing plates, one for each color of the design. First, for the non-playing area, everything outside the scratch zone. Each negative goes onto a paper-thin aluminum plate coated with a UV-sensitive emulsion. They expose the plate to UV light for about 20 seconds. This hardens the unshielded emulsion. The rest is washed away in a chemical bath, leaving the design in relief on the plate. For the ticket's playing area, a similar process is used, but instead of an aluminum plate coated in emulsion, they use one made of photopolymer, a light-sensitive plastic. The finished plates are now ready to go onto the printing press. Their raised surface will work just like a rubber ink stamp. The non-playing area goes on first. This method is called offset printing. The press applies up to 9 different colors, one after another, from lightest to darkest. High-intensity UV lights dry the ink in a mere half-second between color applications. Next comes the playing area. A high-speed inkjet printer first applies the game numbers, chosen randomly by computer. Infrared lamps dry the ink in a split second. A strobe light enables the press operator to do spot checks as the tickets whiz by at a rate of 16 feet per second. Then the printer gives each ticket a unique barcode. This enables ticket vendors to scan your ticket to see if you've won. It also shows whether a winning ticket is genuine or a forgery. The next machine seals the game numbers with layers of varnish, then applies 6 coats of scratchable ink. An electronic scanner checks the positioning of the scratchable ink, making sure it hides the numbers. The first 3 scratchable ink coats are black. The next 3 are white. All those layers are used to keep cheaters from holding the card up to the light to see the numbers. Now they can finally print the playing area design onto that white background. In this case, a crossword design. A machine now perforates the rolls of tickets so they can be folded. It processes almost 10 feet of tickets per second. Here's what that looks like in slow motion. The next machine folds the tickets along the perforation lines into piles called fan folders. Goodbye slow motion. Here's the actual speed. Before the lottery tickets are shipped out, several samples undergo a quality control inspection. The company checks that the tickets are properly printed. It also performs a series of scratch tests and chemical tests to make sure they're absolutely cheat-proof.